The sun spilled golden light over the hills of Napa Valley, casting a soft shimmer across the Montgomery estate. The vineyards below swayed gently in the breeze, and the scent of roses, imported orchids, and eucalyptus wafted through the open-air reception hall. It was a wedding straight out of a magazine, no, a fairy tale. White tents framed the marble courtyard. Crystal chandeliers hung from silk drapery like frozen fireworks. A quartet played a gentle melody as rows of guests in custom-tailored suits and couture dresses sipped champagne from fluted glasses engraved with gold initials, T&M. Tyler Montgomery stood in the center of it all, 30 years old, effortlessly handsome, and heir to one of California's most influential real estate dynasties. He had that kind of charisma that filled a room before he even spoke. With his slicked-back dark blonde hair, crisp white tuxedo, and the smirk he wore like armor, Tyler looked like the perfect groom. And to many he was. Successful, powerful, and about to marry Margot Whitman, the granddaughter of a senator and a fixture in West Coast high society. Everyone agreed, it was the wedding of the decade. No expense had been spared. Over 400 guests had been flown in from around the country. Influencers live-streamed their arrival. A well-known celebrity chef oversaw the 10-course menu. Even the napkins were monogrammed. But beneath the layers of polish and poise, something else stirred, something uglier. It started the night before, at the bachelor party held on the estate's private terrace. The whiskey flowed freely, and the cigars were thick with ego. Tyler, surrounded by a circle of Ivy League groomsmen and business associates, leaned back in his chair and raised his glass. "You know what would be hilarious," he slurred, grinning. "If we invited Elena to the wedding." A few guys paused mid-laugh. "Elena?" One of them asked, puzzled. "Yeah. You know. The cleaning girl. The one who's always mopping the marble like it's her church altar." "Oh, come on, man," said one of the groomsmen, shifting uncomfortably. "That's low." Tyler chuckled. "Exactly. Imagine the look on everyone's face. Her walking in with that thrift store dignity, standing next to all this." He waved his hand at the opulence surrounding them. "It'll be like putting a janitor in a Chanel runway show."
Derrois sa brief silence.
Then someone laughed. Another joined in. And just like that, the cruelty became entertainment. The next morning, while final touches were being made to the floral arch and the swans were being positioned near the reflecting pool, a small envelope was hand-delivered to a modest room in the guest house behind the estate. Elena Brooks had just finished polishing the silverware when she saw it on her nightstand. A cream-colored envelope, thick and smooth, with her name written in cursive gold letters, Ms. Elena Brooks. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She wasn't on any guest list. She wasn't family. She wasn't even full-time staff. Elena had been working for the Montgomerys on and off for 2 years, hired through an agency to assist during high-profile events and holidays. She mostly kept to herself, discreet, respectful, and efficient. She never asked questions. Never lingered. Never belonged. Yet, there it was, a formal invitation to Tyler Montgomery and Margot Whitman's wedding. Inside the envelope was a card, embossed with gold foil, and a note. "Tyler personally requested your presence. Be sure to dress well."
No signature.
Just those words, delivered with a smirk from the butler who dropped it off. Elena stood for a long time, fingers gently tracing the edges of the card. There was no reason for her to go. No reason other than curiosity, and something else. Something qui était. Pride. She had never spoken more than a handful of words to Tyler Montgomery. But she had once cared for his grandfather, Elliot Montgomery, during the last year of his life. The old man had suffered a minor stroke, and while his family was too busy managing public appearances, Elena had sat beside him, reading to him, helping him eat, listening to him when he struggled to speak. He had called her the only real voice in this house. She never asked for more. She never expected anything. But now, something didn't feel right. She could feel it in her gut. Still that evening, she opened the small garment bag at the back of her closet and pulled out the best dress she owned, a deep blue calf-length gown with a high neckline and modest lace sleeves. She had bought it at a thrift store 3 years ago for a community banquet that she ended up not attending. It was clean. Pressed. And dignifié. She styled her hair into a low bun, applied a touch of gloss to her lips, and stepped out into the evening air with quiet confidence. As Elena approached the main estate, the sounds of laughter, violin strings, and clinking glassware grew louder. She paused briefly at the entrance, showing her invitation to a security guard who barely glanced at it before letting her pass. Inside, conversations dwindled. Heads turned. A few whispers.
A woman in diamonds let out a tiny look behind her champagne flute.
She walked in slowly, shoulders back, eyes forward. Tyler spotted her instantly. He raised his glass and called out across the hall, his voice loud and theatrical. Elena. You came. Every eye turned toward her. She nodded once.
Good evening.
Well, don't just stand there, Tyler said, making his way toward her. This is your big day too, right? A few guests chuckled, though the laughter was nervous. Margot looked confused, then embarrassed. She whispered something to her bridesmaid but didn't move. Elena stood quietly, unmoved. She hadn't been assigned a seat. She wasn't on the guest list, of course. And no one approached her to make conversation. She wasn't offered a drink, nor a plate of hors d'oeuvres. The waitstaff, all familiar with her from previous events, avoided eye contact. Still, she stood with quiet dignity, watching, observing. If anyone had looked closer, they might have seen the storm brewing, not in anger, but in resolve. Because what Elena knew, and what Tyler didn't, was that appearances were fleeting. And not every invitation is a gift. Some are traps. But occasionally, a trap becomes a turning point. And that turning point was coming. Not in years. Not in months. But before the sun would set on this beautiful Californian evening. The evening unfolded in slow, glittering waves. Under the lights of chandeliers strung from white linen canopies, servers glided between the guests with trays of amuse-bouches and vintage champagne. The orchestra's cello section eased into a rendition of Clair de Lune, while guests took selfies against the backdrop of the sunset-soaked hills. Elena remained near the edge of the reception area, her hands gently clasped in front of her. She didn't belong to any of the seated groups, didn't have a name card waiting for her at the elegant dinner tables. Her presence, though technically invited, was like a ripple against the surface of a still pond. The glances kept coming, veiled behind champagne flutes and whispered conversations. Is she one of the vendors? No, I think she works here. Why is she dressed like that? She's not really one of us. She heard every word. Or at least, she felt them. Not spoken to her directly, but flung like darts into the air, hoping to land somewhere near her confidence. They didn't. Elena had walked through rooms like this before, polished, elitist, drowning in silent judgments. But tonight felt different. Not just because of the setting, but because of the intention behind her presence. She wasn't just uninvited. She was deliberately invited, for someone else's amusement. She wasn't naive. She had seen the gleam in Tyler's eyes when he called out to her earlier. It wasn't warmth. It was something colder. A calculated smirk, the kind of look you give a piece on a chessboard before you knock it off just to make a point. Still, she didn't retreat. She moved slowly toward a quiet corner of the garden, where soft lights illuminated the stone fountain. From there she could see the entire party, the elegant couples twirling to music, the bridesmaids giggling in clusters, the photographers darting from one angle to another. It was beautiful. And hollow. Across the garden, Tyler leaned against a bar cart, laughing with two of his groomsmen. He stole a glance in her direction, whispered something, and they laughed harder. Margot, the bride, was nowhere in sight. Elena turned away from their gaze and focused on the sky. The first stars were beginning to pierce through the twilight. She breathed deeply. Her hands were still. Her back, straight. A familiar voice approached. Elena. She turned. It was Thomas, one of the older stewards of the estate. He had worked for the Montgomery family for over 20 years. I didn't expect to see you here, he said softly, his tone cautious. I was invited, she replied calmly. Hésitait-elle. I know. He glanced around. You look lovely. Thank you. There was silence between them for a moment, the kind that holds meaning unspoken. Thomas lowered his voice. Be careful. This crowd, they don't always know how to be kind. Elena gave him a gentle nod. I know. But kindness isn't something I wait for. He looked like he wanted to say more, but a call from one of the event coordinators pulled him away. Elena remained by the fountain, alone once more. Not long after, a subtle shift in music signaled the next act of the evening: speeches. The best man, a former Yale roommate of Tyler's, stood on a small platform with a mic and launched into a monologue laced with backhanded humor, inside jokes, and casual name-dropping. The crowd roared with laughter. Elena remained still, watching, studying. When the speeches ended, the couple was called to the center for their first dance. Tyler and Margot moved into the open floor space, smiling for the cameras. The orchestra picked up a romantic melody, and the two spun slowly beneath a canopy of lights and falling petals. The guests oohed and awed, phones recording, flashes flickering like fireflies. Then, just as the song reached its crescendo, Tyler lifted his head and scanned the crowd. "Elena," he called out suddenly, startling a few people nearby. The music faltered slightly, but resumed. Tyler's voice cut through again. "Elena Brooks. Come on over here." Dozens of eyes turned. Elena didn't move. "I said come here," he repeated, louder this time, laughing.
It's your big détour, Remembé?
The crowd shifted uneasily. She walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. The gown she wore moved gently around her calves. Her chin was high. When she reached the edge of the dance floor, Tyler stepped toward her and extended his hand. "Let's give Elena a little spotlight, huh? I mean, she's worked so hard around here. She deserves it." Laughter. Nervous. Shallow. Uneven. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she asked quietly, "What is it you want me to do?" Tyler shrugged, still smiling. "Just stand right here."
Don't worry.
He snapped his fingers. A server appeared, carrying a plate with a single slice of wedding cake, 3 layers of buttercream, lemon filling, and gold leaf on top. "Here we go," Tyler said. "You get the first bite. That's a big honor, you know." Elena looked at the plate, then back at him. The server hesitated. "Go on," Tyler coaxed, turning toward the crowd. "Let's give her a round of applause." Some people clapped. Others just watched, confused, uncomfortable. Elena took a step forward. Tyler leaned in close, just enough so only she could hear him.
Smile for the camera, sweetheart.
Then in one swift motion, he shoved the plate upward, smearing the cake across her face, into her mouth, her nose, her hair. Gasps. Someone dropped a glass. Flashes went off. Click, click, click. She stumbled back slightly, cake dripping from her chin, her dress stained. The orchestra stopped. The air turned cold. A few people laughed, awkwardly. But most stood frozen. Elena did not cry. She did not shout. She reached for a napkin, wiped her face carefully, and then looked at Tyler. Straight in the eyes. Calm. Steady. "You'll regret this," she said, "before the sun goes down." Then she turned and walked away. The silence she left behind was louder than any scream. The aftermath of the incident was thick and suffocating. No one moved at first. It was as though the party had been placed under a spell, one brought not by music or champagne, but by shame. Tyler stood in the center of it, still holding the plate smeared with cake, his smirk faltering. A groomsman chuckled weakly beside him, but even he seemed uncertain whether to keep laughing or disappear. The silence weighed heavier with each passing second. Margot appeared from the far side of the crowd, her expression unreadable. She had seen the moment unfold from a distance, and now she walked slowly toward Tyler, her heels tapping sharply against the stone floor. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She simply stared. "What?" Tyler said, brushing off imaginary crumbs from his lapel. "It was a joke." Margot didn't answer. Her eyes moved to the napkin Elena had left behind, stained with cream and frosting, lying alone on the stone floor. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing behind a curtain of silk and candlelight. Whispers began to rise among the guests. Some left quietly. Others pulled out their phones. A few approached staff, demanding to know who the girl was. But no one could give them a clear answer. Elena didn't return to the guest house. She left through the side entrance of the estate, walking with her head high despite the remnants of cake still clinging to her dress. The valet offered to call her a car, but she declined. She preferred the silence of the walk, the cool air on her skin, the sound of gravel beneath her feet. By the time she reached the edge of the property, the sky was a dark lavender hue, the sun just beginning to sink below the vineyard hills. And by then, the first video had already been uploaded.
23 seconds.
Captured from a shaky phone. No context, no narration. Just the moment Tyler smashed cake into Elena's face, and the stunned hush that followed. Within the hour, it had been viewed 80,000 times. By midnight, that number had climbed past 1 million. People didn't need context. The video spoke for itself. It carried the weight of centuries of hierarchy and humiliation, repackaged into a single act dressed up as humor.
The hashtag spread like wildfire.
Hashtag Montgomery wedding. Hashtag Elena Brooks.
Hashtag notajoc.
Hashtag dignity matters. Hashtag power and privilege. A popular social media influencer reposted the clip with the caption, "This is what entitlement looks like." Comments poured in from every corner of the country. I don't care if it was a joke.
You don't treat people like that.
Who is she? Someone find her. She didn't flinch.
That is the real power.
Imagine humiliating a woman of color on your wedding day and still thinking you're the good guy. Cancel him. By morning, national news outlets were picking up the story. The Montgomery PR team issued a vague statement calling the event a misunderstanding taken out of context, but it only fanned the flames. People began to dig. Journalists uncovered old posts, whispers from former staff members, unflattering glimpses into the Montgomery family's long history of quietly brushing aside complaints. And in the middle of it all stood Elena, no longer invisible, but still silent. She hadn't posted a word. Hadn't responded to any of the interview requests flooding her inbox. She had turned her phone off and spent the night in a quiet motel on the outskirts of town. The only person she spoke to was Harvey Lang. He met her the next morning, precisely at 9 o'clock, in the small office suite tucked behind a quiet bookstore in downtown Sonoma. The office bore no family crests or luxury furnishings, just shelves lined with old legal volumes and a polished oak table. Harvey Lang was a man of few words, but immense presence. He had been Elliot Montgomery's personal attorney for nearly 30 years, and he had kept every one of his clients' wishes locked away until the day came to carry them out. That day had arrived. When Elena entered the room, she wore the same calm expression she had the night before. Her hair was tied back. A navy blue blouse replaced the cake-stained dress. Her hands were steady. "Ms. Brooks," Harvey said, rising slightly from his chair. "Mr. Lang," she replied with a nod. "Thank you for meeting me." He gestured for her to sit. "I assume you've seen the news," he said after a moment. "I've seen enough," she answered. "But that's not why I'm here." "I know." He opened the drawer and placed a slim leather case on the table. Inside was a single document, sealed in a cream envelope stamped with red wax. "The final will and testament of Elliot Montgomery," Harvey said, "to be opened in the presence of the individuals named inside." "And that's happening today?" He nodded. "At 10 o'clock. At the estate. You're expected." Elena exhaled, not nervously, but with resolve.
Elle be there.
Harvey didn't smile, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You should be." Back at the estate, chaos had already begun to unfold. Margot had refused to speak to Tyler that morning. She locked herself in one of the guest rooms and turned off her phone. The wedding was effectively over. The guests had cleared out. The media trucks, however, had arrived. Tyler stood at the window of his bedroom, watching a drone hover over the property, broadcasting live aerial shots to morning talk shows. His jaw clenched. He didn't think it would go this far. He had seen people get cancelled before, actors, CEOs, influencers. But not people like him.
Not Montgomery.
They didn't get cancelled. They paid someone to fix things. But this? This wasn't going away. He turned to find a text from his father, "You've embarrassed the family. Fix it." And beneath that, a message from his assistant, "There's a reading of your grandfather's will this morning. 10 a.m. You should be there." Tyler scoffed. Of course. Leave it to the old man to time things perfectly. Still, he got dressed. An hour later, Tyler Montgomery walked into the West Wing study of the estate, where 5 chairs had been arranged around a mahogany table. Harvey Lang was already seated, flanked by 2 legal witnesses. And across the room, In the same quiet poise she always carried, sat Elena Brooks. Tyler froze. "What is she doing here?" he snapped. Harvey looked up without blinking. "She's not staff today, Mr. Montgomery," he said evenly. "She's a named party in your grandfather's will." Tyler stared at Elena. She didn't look away. For the first time he felt it, not anger, not confusion, but a chill. Like the moment before a storm breaks. And this storm had a name. The heavy double doors of the Montgomery estate's west wing closed behind Tyler with a soft thud. The room was silent except for the quiet shuffle of papers and the occasional creak of leather as someone adjusted in their seat.
Morning light streamed in through the tall arched windows, catching the dust mote suspended in the air like tiny star.
Tyler stood in the doorway for a beat longer than necessary, as if unsure whether to walk in or walk away. The presence of Elena, sitting across the room with the same collected stillness she had carried through the previous night's spectacle, unsettled him. She had no right to be there. Not at his family's table. Not in this room. He stepped forward, lips tight, and dropped into the chair opposite her. "I hope this is a formality," he said aloud, to no one in particular. Harvey Lang glanced up from the manila folder he was sorting. "It is not," the attorney replied curtly. Two other individuals sat on either side of Harvey, both in dark suits, both observing without expression. They were representatives from the firm responsible for overseeing the Montgomery family's legal affairs. Everything today would be recorded, documented, and notarized. "Let's begin," Harvey said, placing the sealed envelope in the center of the table. He broke the wax seal carefully and removed the document within. He cleared his throat and began to read.
I, Elliot James Montgomery, being of sound mind and judgment, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament.
I acknowledge that I have previously distributed portions of my estate through private trusts to my children and grandchildren, including but not limited to my grandson, Tyler Montgomery. This document pertains to the remainder of my estate, the Montgomery Foundation, and the ownership rights of Montgomery Holdings. Tyler sat up straighter. He already had access to one trust fund, enough to support several lifetimes of luxury. But the real wealth, the control of the foundation, the estate, and the company bearing his family name, that was the crown. That was what mattered. Harvey continued. "To my grandson Tyler, I leave the previously dispersed trust. I do not, however, grant you authority over the remaining assets, nor any controlling interest in Montgomery Holdings."
Tyler blinked.
There was a pause in the room, not in the reading, but in the air. A shift.
A tread pulled loose.
Harvey kept reading. "My decision is not without thought. Over the past years, I have observed your choices, your use of power, your lack of humility, your treatment of those you believe beneath you. Wealth without compassion is a dangerous thing. I hoped you would learn. You did not." Tyler opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "To the one person who showed me kindness in my final days," Harvey continued, "not out of obligation or opportunity, but because she saw me not as a name, but as a man, I leave the Montgomery estate, the foundation, and controlling shares in Montgomery Holdings." He looked up.
To Elena Brooks.
The room held its breath.
Tyler's voice broke the silence. "What the hell are you talking about?"
Harvey calmly handed him a notarized copy of the will. "This was signed and witnessed 3 months before Mr. Montgomery's passing," he said. "All legal and binding." "She's a maid," Tyler snapped, his voice rising. "She cleans floors." "And she also cared for your grandfather when no one else in this family could be bothered," Harvey said, his tone sharper now. "She was by his side when he couldn't speak, couldn't eat, couldn't even sit up. She read to him. She listened. She treated him like a human being, not an inheritance plan." Tyler looked at Elena. She hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. He turned back to the attorney. "This is absurd." He was old. He didn't know what he was doing. He was of sound mind. Evaluated by medical professionals. "And every change to this will was made under legal supervision," Harvey said. "Unless you intend to challenge the legality of the entire firm." Tyler's jaw clenched. He looked around the room for support, but found none. Even the two firm representatives kept their faces neutral. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "This is a setup." "It's reality," Harvey replied. "And you'd be wise to adapt." "Why her?" Tyler asked, more to the room than to anyone in particular. What makes her worthy of this? Harvey folded his hands. Do you really need to ask that? Or do you already know? Elena finally spoke. She turned to Tyler, voice steady and calm. I never asked for any of this, she said. Your grandfather offered it to me because he trusted me. Because I treated him the way I would want to be treated. That's all. You manipulated him, Tyler hissed. You used him. I sat beside him while you were at clubs and yacht parties, she said, still calm. He knew who was real and who wasn't. Tyler stood suddenly, the force pushing his chair back. This isn't over, he said. You won't get away with this. Elena looked at him, eyes unwavering. I don't need to get away with anything. I was there.
You weren't.
That's the difference. Harvey closed the folder. Unless you plan to file a challenge, this meeting is concluded. Tyler didn't answer. He stormed out of the room, footsteps echoing against the marble. Elena remained seated. Harvey turned to her, his voice now softened. I know this is a lot, he said. She nodded. I know. There will be press. There will be backlash. I expected that. You'll need a team. Security. Advisors. A board of directors.
Understand.
He paused. And you'll need to decide how to lead something built by people who never expected someone like you to lead it. Elena looked out the window, where the sun had fully risen above the vineyard. The estate gleamed in the morning light, grand, intimidating, and now hers. I don't want to be anyone's revenge story, she said softly. But I won't be invisible either. Harvey gave a slight nod of approval. In that case, Ms. Brooks, he said, we have work to do. By noon that day, the news had broken across every major outlet. Former Maid inherits billion-dollar estate. Tyler Montgomery disinherited in stunning will reveal. Meet Elena Brooks, the woman who now owns Montgomery Holdings. The story wasn't just sensational, it was magnetic. The clip of the cake incident had already made headlines, but this development turned it into a narrative too irresistible to ignore. What had begun as a social media scandal became a national reckoning on class, race, and privilege. Reporters camped outside the Montgomery estate. Camera crews hovered like vultures. Legal analysts debated the validity of the will on television. Podcasts dissected every detail of Elena's past, from her time in the foster system to her quiet years of labor behind the scenes of the elite. Meanwhile, Tyler became a ghost in his own life. He locked himself in the guest wing of the estate, refusing calls from lawyers, investors, and even his own father. Margot had left the morning after the will reading. She didn't make a scene, just packed her things and slipped away without saying goodbye. Her note was short, this isn't who I am. This isn't who I want to be with. Tyler's fall was swift and unceremonious. By the end of the week, the Montgomery Board of Directors voted to remove him from all remaining executive functions. Several sponsors publicly severed ties with the family brand. Real estate deals collapsed. A long-term hotel project in Dubai was pulled by foreign investors citing reputational risk. He had become toxic. And worst of all, he couldn't spin it. There was no PR campaign strong enough to reverse the image of him laughing while smashing cake into a woman's face. He watched the fallout unfold from the solitude of his bedroom, the curtains drawn, the television playing on mute. His hands shook when he scrolled through comments online, thousands of strangers dissecting him, mocking him, condemning him. Once, he might have felt invincible. Now, he felt disposable. 2 days after the will reading, Tyler packed a single suitcase and left the estate. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't say goodbye. The staff didn't look at him. The house felt colder than it ever had. He paused at the grand entrance, marble under his shoes, the towering double staircase looming behind him. Elena was there, standing near the bottom step. She didn't gloat. She didn't flinch. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. I never thought it would end like this, he said quietly. She nodded. Neither did I. I was stupid. Yes. I'm sorry. Elena studied him for a moment.
I believe you're sorry.
But not for the right reasons. He frowned. What does that mean?
You're sorry you got cooked.
Sorry it cost you everything. But I don't think you're sorry for how you treated people before that. Tyler didn't argue. He couldn't. I forgave you, she said, the second you pushed that cake in my face. He blinked. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, she added. And it doesn't come with restoration.
Just release.
He nodded slowly.
What happen now?
You leave, she said. And I begin. With that, he stepped outside. No one followed. Elena stood in the silence after he left, feeling a strange stillness.
Not satisfaction.
Not triumph.
Something else. Acquiet, unfamiliar wect.
She was now the legal owner of the estate.
The controlling voice of Montgomery Holdings.
The figurehead of a narrative being spun across the country as either a fairy tale or a social revolution. And she hadn't asked for any of it. By the end of the day, 3 national news anchors had requested exclusive interviews. A publishing house offered a book deal. A network floated the idea of a limited series drama. Her inbox was full of praise, suspicion, outrage, admiration, and demands. She deleted most of it. The only people she allowed past the gates were 2 former maids she had worked with and trusted, Anita and Rosa. Together, they walked through the house room by room. They didn't speak much, but their presence made the walls feel less heavy. I used to clean these windows, Anita whispered in the grand hallway. Now you own them, Rosa said. Elena didn't reply. She didn't need to. That night she sat in the study, the same room where the will had been read, and opened a drawer in Elliot Montgomery's old desk. Inside was a leather notebook, soft and worn. She flipped it open. It was filled with his handwriting.
Page of réflexion.
Notes to himself. Observations about the world, his family, and most surprisingly, about her. She read a line slowly, tracing each word with her eyes. Elena sees people. Even when no one sees her. She has something this house lost a long time ago, a soul. She closed the notebook, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes, though none fell. He had seen her. Even when no one else had. The next morning, Elena held her first official meeting as head of Montgomery Holdings. The board, now fully assembled in the downtown office, awaited her entrance with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She walked in wearing a navy blue pantsuit. No jewelry.
No entourage.
Just confidence. She stood at the head of the table and said clearly, "Let's begin." The meeting lasted 2 hours. She didn't bark orders. She listened, asked sharp questions, and made firm decisions. The board left impressed. Not because she had years of corporate experience, but because she had clarity. Purpose. She didn't want to build empires. She wanted to change lives. The press continued to circle. But Elena focused her energy elsewhere. She launched a full audit of the Montgomery Foundation. She restructured the charitable arm to direct funds toward educational access for children in foster care, mental health support for underserved communities, and job placement programs for single mothers. Within weeks, people began to see that her leadership wasn't just symbolic, it was transformative. Still, the world debated. Talk shows asked, did she deserve it? Editorials questioned, was it ethical for a maid to inherit a billion-dollar estate? Influencers praised, she's the embodiment of grace under fire. Critics warned, we're setting a precedent for emotional inheritance over bloodline. Elena didn't respond to any of them. She worked. Quietly.
Relentlessly.
And somewhere in the noise, the country began to shift, not just in how they saw her, but in how they saw what power should look like. 3 weeks after Elena Brooks became the legal heir to the Montgomery estate and holdings, the headlines still hadn't faded. If anything, they had multiplied. Some news segments treated her story as inspiration, an unexpected, graceful rise from obscurity. Others saw it as controversy. Editorial boards debated the morality of legacy and merit. Television hosts lined up opposing guests to argue, was this poetic justice or misplaced charity? Deserved or inherited by sentiment? Elena watched none of it. She had instructed her assistant to forward only messages that required legal or operational attention. Everything else, book offers, movie rights, morning show requests, went unread. She knew the narrative would bend and twist no matter what she said. Still, there were moments when silence wasn't an option. The first came in the form of a letter. Not an email. Not a request from a PR firm. A handwritten letter, addressed directly to her in smooth cursive. Ms. Brooks. My name is Diane Vaughan. I host a national segment called Conscience and Country. I don't want your tragedy. I don't want your scandal.
You want your truth.
If there comes a time you feel ready to speak, not to defend but to define, I'd be honored to sit across from you. It was signed with a phone number and a single sentence beneath it, when you're ready. The letter sat on Elena's desk for 4 days before she made the call. The interview was scheduled for a private studio with minimal crew and no pre-written questions. Elena didn't bring a stylist or a manager. She wore a soft grey dress and a pearl pin she found among Elliot Montgomery's belongings, nothing showy, just symbolic. The lights were gentle.
The room quiet.
Diane began with a warm greeting, no fanfare, and the first question wasn't about money or inheritance. It was about presence. When you walked into that wedding, Diane asked, did you know what would happen? Elena paused for a moment before answering. I knew I wasn't being invited out of kindness, she said. But I didn't know how far they would go. Why did you go? Because dignity isn't something you give me. It's something I carry. And I wasn't going to let someone take that from me without showing up. Diane leaned forward slightly. When the cake hit your face, what were you thinking? I was thinking that silence can be louder than screaming. The rest of the interview unfolded with the same quiet intensity. Elena didn't cry. She didn't rage. She explained. She reflected. She spoke of Elliot Montgomery not as a benefactor, but as a man who'd once lost everything and knew what it meant to be seen again. She shared fragments of her childhood, the foster homes, the libraries that became her escape, the elderly she had cared for in nursing facilities before working at the estate. I never wanted power, she said. I just wanted peace. But sometimes, peace demands you stand where no one expects you to stand. The interview aired 3 days later. It didn't trend because of scandal. It trended because of stillness. Clips circulated not with fury but reverence. Her words echoed in schools, offices, churches. People wrote think pieces not just about inheritance but about leadership. Not just about wealth, but about what it means to be entrusted with change. Donations to the restructured Montgomery Foundation tripled in 1 week. More importantly, volunteers poured in, mentors, educators, community leaders. People who had never seen themselves reflected in the legacy of wealth suddenly felt like they had a seat at the table. But not everyone applauded. At an elite country club dinner in Palm Springs, a former Montgomery investor sneered to a group of peers over a glass of Pinot Noir, "She's not running an empire.
She's running a sob story."
In the boardroom of a rival company, a younger executive questioned, how long can sentiment sustain an empire built on cold decisions? And within the walls of a certain downtown law firm, the wheels of resistance began to turn. A class action lawsuit was filed by a distant Montgomery cousin, alleging that Elliot's will had been the product of undue emotional influence. Though the claim lacked substantial evidence, the media pounced. Headlines reappeared. Montgomery heiress faces legal challenge. Family member calls inheritance a mistake fueled by emotion. Elena met with her legal team calmly. We expected this, she said. Harvey Lang, now acting as her general counsel, nodded. It won't hold. But they're counting on public doubt. Elena folded the documents. Then let's give the public truth. She didn't run another interview. Instead, she scheduled a town hall at the newly renovated Montgomery Community Center, formerly the estate's guest house. The event was open to the public, no RSVP required. Hundreds showed up. She walked on stage without music or introduction, just a single spotlight and a handheld mic. I didn't grow up knowing this kind of wealth, she began. I grew up knowing how to stretch $5 over 3 days. I knew how to hold my breath when someone looked at me like I didn't belong in the room. She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. But this isn't about money. It's about memory. About the memory of people who gave their lives to build something and the memory of people who were erased while doing it. Elliot Montgomery wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. But in the end, he remembered. He saw someone who didn't ask for anything, and he gave everything. Not because I needed it, but because he needed to do what was right. The room was silent. She lowered the mic slightly.
I'm not here to défend my place.
I'm here to use it. The crowd erupted. Outside, reporters took notes. Analysts revised their commentaries. Even critics online found themselves pausing mid-tweet. Because what Elena Brooks had done wasn't seize power. She had redefined it. And that kind of shift wasn't something you could challenge in court. It was something you had to reckon with in your own reflection. The town hall had left an imprint. Not just in news cycles, but in minds. Elena's words replayed on radio segments, echoed in classrooms, and rippled across neighborhoods that had never imagined someone like them could own something as formidable as the Montgomery name. But somewhere far from the applause and the spotlight, in a rented apartment on the outskirts of San Francisco, Tyler Montgomery sat on the edge of a futon, staring into nothing. The place was modest, 2 rooms, no view. The furniture was generic, rented. There were no grand staircases, no antique portraits, no echoes of legacy in the walls.
Juste silence.
The kind that crept in after pride had left. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. His phone buzzed, ignored.
Email piled up.
His name trended online only in reference to Elena, and always in contrast. Where she was praised, he was remembered as the man who mocked a woman and lost everything in return. He played the video back once. Just once. That 23-second clip, her face hitting the cake, the stunned silence, his laugh, felt like a lifetime ago and yet unbearably present. He watched his own smirk, the smug tilt of his head, the casual cruelty in his eyes. And for the first time, he didn't hate the people calling him names online. He hated the man in the video. He had spent his entire life being told he was special. Groomed to lead, to inherit, to succeed. Private schools, summer programs, fast-track internships, all reinforcing the same message: you were born to rule. But no one ever taught him how to be decent.
How to be still. How to listen.
What Elena had done was more than take away an inheritance. She had held up a mirror. And he couldn't look away. On the 6th day in his apartment, Tyler left. He walked until he found a neighborhood that looked nothing like the ones he was raised in: brick buildings, corner markets, murals on the walls. He stepped into a community library. It was quiet, lined with shelves of used books and paper signs with quotes handwritten by local children. He sat at a back table and opened a laptop. No PR firms. No advisors. Just him and a blank document. He started writing. At first, it was defensive. Then regretful. Then honest. He wrote about his upbringing, his choices, his ignorance. He wrote about the wedding, the joke, the laugh, the silence. He wrote about Elena. Not as an enemy, not as a symbol, but as a person who had shown him something he never expected to see: that character doesn't bow to legacy. When he finished, he read it twice. Then he emailed it to Diane Vaughn. The same journalist who had interviewed Elena. The same journalist who didn't chase scandal, but truth. 3 days later, Diane responded with a single line. I'll give you 15 minutes.
Dette salé yo-yo.
The interview was filmed in a neutral studio. No stage.
No audience.
No promises. Diane didn't open with small talk. You know why people won't believe you? She asked, looking him straight in the eye. Because redemption doesn't come with a camera crew. Tyler nodded. I know. Then why are you here? Because disappearing isn't the same as changing. Diane considered that.
What do you want?
Not forgiveness, he said.
You want the truth to live outside the viral version of me.
So he spoke. Not to salvage his image, but to confess. He admitted the joke wasn't accidental, that the humiliation was deliberate, that the laughter was real. He described the entitlement he wore like armor, the shame that followed him now like a shadow. And he ended with this. I used to think power meant taking space. Now I know it means knowing when to step back. Elena didn't just inherit a company. She inherited a broken system and chose to repair it. I inherited a name and chose to tarnish it. She showed me what I refused to see in myself. The interview aired late on a Sunday night. It didn't trend. It didn't spark debates. But it reached the people who needed to see it, not the angry, not the gleeful, but the silent ones, the ones who had made their own mistakes and were waiting to know if growth was still possible. The comments were mixed. Some said it was too late. Others said it was a start. Elena watched it alone, from her office at the community center. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But she watched it all the way through. The next morning, an envelope arrived at her office.
No sender.
Just her name handwritten in a familiar style. Inside was a check.
Maid out to the Montgomery Foundation.
Amount, $1 million. Signed, Tyler Montgomery. There was no note.
Just the action.
She placed the check on her desk and stared at it for a long time. When her assistant asked what to do with it, Elena said only, "Deposit it." Quietly. Later that week, the foundation opened a scholarship in the name of Darius Brooks, Elena's father, the firefighter who had saved Elliot Montgomery's life 25 years earlier.
No press release. No ribbon cutting.
Just 30 kids receiving a chance they never thought they'd get. And somewhere in a modest apartment, Tyler Montgomery sat in front of a laptop, applying for a position at a non-profit organization, entry-level, no special title. He didn't use his last name. And for the first time, that felt right. Summer arrived gently in Napa Valley, painting the vineyard hills in vibrant greens and sun-kissed golds. At the edge of the Montgomery estate, just beyond the gates that once symbolized exclusivity, the old guest house had been completely transformed. It was no longer a space for visitors who came to sip wine and attend gala dinners. It had become the beating heart of something new. The Montgomery Community Center, reopened under Elena's leadership, was more than a building. It was a declaration. Inside, walls that had once held portraits of aristocrats now displayed photographs of community leaders, teachers, nurses, and local volunteers. The rooms echoed not with the polished hush of wealth, but with laughter, conversation, and purposeful footsteps. In one wing, classrooms provided after-school tutoring. In another, a mental health clinic offered sliding-scale counseling. A third wing housed a business incubator for women transitioning out of the foster system, offering training, mentorship, and microgrants. Elena moved through the center with intention. She greeted every volunteer by name. She asked about their families, listened carefully to their concerns, and remembered what they said. Her leadership style wasn't performative. It was personal. She had declined all further media appearances. She didn't need a spotlight to prove the work mattered. The results spoke for themselves. Within 3 months, the center had provided services to over 2,000 individuals in the surrounding counties. The foundation had funded new libraries in 3 public schools and granted scholarships to 40 students pursuing degrees in social work and education. But perhaps the most remarkable shift was in how the community responded. At first, there was hesitation. Many locals had driven past the Montgomery estate their entire lives assuming it was a place for other people, untouchable, reserved, silent. Now, they parked in the gravel lot without fear. Parents brought their children for free weekend programs. Seniors attended music therapy sessions in the converted ballroom. The mansion itself remained largely unused. Elena had moved into a modest cottage on the edge of the estate. It was quiet, with ivy climbing the walls and a single cherry blossom tree out front. It suited her more than marble and crystal ever could. She spent most of her days at the center and her nights reading in the study Elliot once called his sanctuary. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Elena stood alone in the grand dining hall of the main house. The room was still as she remembered it, ornate chandeliers, carved ceiling panels, long windows catching the last light of day. She remembered standing near this very spot at the wedding, with frosting dripping from her face and humiliation burning on her skin. Now the room was empty, quiet, but alive with echoes of something else, dignity restored. Behind her, footsteps approached. Harvey Lang entered, carrying a folder. "You're hard to find when you're not in the office," he said. "I'm not hiding," she replied. "I didn't say you were." He handed her the folder. "The final filings are complete. The Montgomery Foundation has been officially restructured under its new charter. You now have sole authority over all programmatic decisions and budget allocations." Elena took the folder but didn't open it. "It's strange, isn't it? How many people tried to tell me I wasn't supposed to have any of this? And now it's written down in legal ink." Harvey smiled faintly. "It was always yours. Elliot just made it official." She set the folder on the table and looked out the window. "Sometimes I still wake up and forget I'm not cleaning this place," she said. "Like I should be dusting, not directing." "That's called humility," Harvey replied. "Don't lose it." She turned toward him. Do you think I'm doing it right? I think you're doing it honestly. That's more rare than right. He left her with that thought. Later that night, Elena sat down at her desk and opened a letter addressed to the foundation. It was from a girl named Tasha, 16, from Oakland. The handwriting was neat but hesitant.
Dear Miss Brox,
I don't know if this will reach you. I don't have anyone in my life who looks like you and runs something like this. I never thought someone who grew up like me could own anything. But I saw your interview. I saw how you didn't cry. And now I want to be someone who doesn't cry when people try to humiliate me.
you want to learn.
Thank you for showing me that people like us can matter. Elena folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and exhaled deeply. These were the ripples. The things no viral moment could predict. The next day, she invited Tasha and her mother to the center.
No cameras.
No announcements. Just an invitation to come see what was possible. Meanwhile, Tyler remained out of the public eye. The check he had sent to the foundation had gone through quietly, and he hadn't followed up. But word spread, he had taken a job at a small nonprofit in Sacramento, working in grant research and outreach. He used his skills not to leverage power, but to support programs he never once considered during his time at the helm of Montgomery Holdings. He no longer introduced himself with his last name. And when asked why, he simply said, "Because it doesn't belong to me anymore." Elena didn't speak of him.
Not in interview.
Not in meetings. But when she saw his name on a list of attendees for an upcoming statewide nonprofit conference, she paused. She circled it. And she made a note to herself, growth doesn't need permission.
Juste recognition.
She wasn't interested in revenge arcs or redemption dramas. She was interested in work. And in a world where people often chased legacy for legacy's sake, Elena Brooks had quietly begun to redefine what it meant to leave something behind. Not a name.
Not ta mention.
But a movement. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of quiet anticipation that doesn't announce itself but settles deep in the bones. It had been 4 months since Elena Brooks became the legal owner of the Montgomery estate, and for the first time, the mansion would open its doors again, not for aristocrats or politicians, but for the people the foundation was built to serve. The invitation had been simple, an evening for community.
Nos blackteyeux requirements.
No VIP section.
Nos velvet robes.
Just an open call to those who had contributed, worked, mentored, learned, or simply believed. The estate shimmered under a canopy of string lights and lanterns. Instead of imported orchids, the gardens bloomed with local wildflowers. The orchestral music of past galas had been replaced with a jazz trio from a public high school in Oakland. The food was prepared by a cooperative of single mothers trained through one of the foundation's new culinary programs. And Elena stood at the top of the grand staircase in a white gown, not silk or sequins, but soft cotton and lace, made by a local designer who once worked as a janitor in the very building where her studio now stood. She didn't wear diamonds. She wore the moment. Below her, the crowd buzzed with warmth. Formerly incarcerated youth shook hands with city council members. Social workers shared wine with students they once mentored. The past, the present, and the possible stood together in one space, equal, open, human. Elena descended the stairs slowly, nodding to each guest she passed. She took no center stage, made no grand entrance. She simply walked among the people who now saw the Montgomery name not as a gate, but as a door. Near the back of the room, someone watched her silently.
Tyler Montgomery.
He wore a plain suit, no tie. His hair, once meticulously styled, now fell naturally, slightly curled at the ends. He stood alone, not hiding, but not inserting himself either. He wasn't there for the cameras. There weren't any. He was just there. Elena noticed him. She didn't stop. Not at first. She made her rounds, shook hands, asked names, thanked volunteers, offered smiles that reached her eyes. She listened. She remembered. And then, as the music shifted to a softer tempo, she walked across the room toward him. He straightened instinctively but didn't speak. "Did you come to be seen?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I came to see." They stood in silence for a moment, not as adversaries, but as people who had once shared a moment of harm and were now standing in the echo of its consequences. "This place looks different," Tyler said. "It feels different," Elena replied. "That was always more important." He nodded, eyes scanning the space. You did what no one in my family ever could. I listened.
You listened.
You cared. You gave away the very power they spent decades hoarding. Elena crossed her arms lightly. You could have done that too. I didn't know how. You never tried. He accepted that. No defense. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I know. I just wanted to be here. To witness it. To understand it better. She studied him. You were given every advantage, she said. And you used them to step on people like me. I know. And now? Now I'm using what's left of that advantage to get out of the way of people like you. Elena didn't smile, but her eyes softened. I don't need you to get out of the way, she said. I need you to learn how to walk beside. He nodded slowly. That might take time. Then take the time. They stood there a little longer, surrounded by laughter and music and the quiet hum of community being built in real time. Then Elena stepped back. There's someone I want you to meet, she said. She led him to a young woman standing near the gallery entrance. Her name was Tosha. 16. The girl who had written her the letter weeks ago. Tosha, Elena said, this is Tyler. He's learning. Tosha raised an eyebrow. Learning what?
Elena smiled.
How to show up differently. Tosha extended her hand. Tyler shook it. Good, Tosha said plainly. We need more people trying to do that. The rest of the evening unfolded like a slow bloom. Speeches were brief and sincere. Stories were told, not about billion-dollar legacies, but about reclaimed lives, unexpected second chances, and the small miracles of being seen. Elena gave her speech last. She stepped up to the front of the hall without fanfare. A single mic. A quiet crowd. When I first walked into this house, she began, I was a worker. Then I was a joke. Then I was an heir. But tonight, I'm just someone who stayed. She let that settle. There are people who will tell you that leadership is about commanding. That legacy is about bloodlines. That change only comes from titles. But I've learned that none of that is true. She paused, her voice steady. Dignity is not something you inherit.
It's something you practice.
And justice is not what you're given, it's what you build. Applause rose, not thunderous, but deep and resonant. She ended with this. Thank you for helping me turn a moment of shame into a movement of shared power. This house doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the work. And tonight, that work continues, with all of you. As the guests stood in ovation, Elena stepped down, blending back into the crowd. There were no fireworks.
No orchestra.
Just people. Together. And that was enough. Weeks passed after the gala, but the resonance lingered. The footage, captured informally on guests' phones, began to spread across social media, not because it was dramatic, but because it was authentic. There were no grand speeches edited for virality, no choreographed statements, no filters. Just truth. Clips of Elena's closing remarks were shared by community leaders, teachers, and even a few politicians. Her words, dignity is not something you inherit. It's something you practice, appeared in classrooms, newsletters, and advocacy campaigns. The narrative had shifted, not just around her, but around the idea of power itself. It no longer wore a suit and tie by default. It no longer lived only in penthouses and boardrooms. It lived in the center of town, in shared spaces, in ideas that spread when people felt seen. Inside the Montgomery Community Center, a small bronze plaque was installed near the entrance. It didn't feature Elena's name. It simply read, "To all those who were told they didn't belong, welcome home." That was the kind of legacy she wanted. Not a name engraved in marble.
A door left open.
She spent her days surrounded by the fruits of quiet labor. She mentored young women starting businesses, sat on panels about restorative leadership, and walked with teenagers through the very neighborhoods she used to clean for other people. She did not become a symbol. She remained a person. But her presence meant something now, something weighty, enduring. One morning, several months after the gala, Elena stood in the garden behind the estate. The early autumn wind moved through the branches. The vineyard rows, once symbols of exclusivity, now bordered trails open to local schools and non-profit retreats. She wore a simple cardigan, notebook in hand, reviewing proposals for a new mental health initiative. A voice called out behind her.
Elena.
She turned. Harvey Lang approached, carrying an envelope. Though he had officially retired, he still came by the estate from time to time, not as a lawyer, but as a friend. "This just arrived," he said. "Thought you'd want to read it privately." She took the envelope, nodding. His eyes told her it mattered. Inside was a letter, folded with care. It was handwritten, steady and thoughtful. "Dear Elena, I've stayed quiet for a while, and I think that's been the right thing. I've had a lot to learn, and more to unlearn. I still do. But I wanted to say something before too much time passed. You didn't just change the story. You changed what stories are allowed to be told.
I'm working now.
Not at the top. Not in charge. But in service. It's different. Harder. More honest. I used to think legacy was about being remembered. Now I think it's about being useful. Thank you for showing me that. If you ever need help, I'm here."
No headline.
No cameras.
"Just me. T." Elena folded the letter gently and slipped it into her journal. She didn't need to respond. Some messages don't ask for replies. That afternoon, the foundation hosted a celebration for its first cohort of youth fellows, students who had completed internships, workshops, and leadership training through the center's new programs. Families filled the courtyard. Speeches were short. Certificates were handed out with hugs and laughter. A group of students performed spoken-word poetry about healing, about rising, about reclaiming. When it was over, one of the youngest fellows, a boy named Jonah, barely 15, walked up to Elena. "You really own this place?" he asked, eyes wide. "I do," she said, smiling. He looked around, as if still trying to believe it. "You don't act like the other people who own stuff." Elena leaned in slightly. "That's because owning something doesn't mean acting like you're better than everyone else." Jonah thought about that.
Can you own something one day?
"You already do," she said.
You own your voice. Start there.
He grinned and ran off to join his friends. As the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the vineyard and the red brick walkways, Elena returned to the study. She opened her notebook, flipped past meeting notes and program outlines, and stopped on a blank page. At the top, she wrote,
What we leave behind. And beneatit.
"Legacy isn't the weight of a name. It's the way a door stays open after you walk through it." She closed the notebook, her hand resting gently on the cover. Outside, the estate glowed not with chandeliers, but with lanterns strung across the courtyard. Laughter rose from the garden. Music played from a speaker brought in by the youth fellows. A breeze swept through the air, bringing with it the scent of soil, wildflowers, and something else, something freer. For the first time, the Montgomery estate felt like it belonged to the world. Elena looked out the window, watching the light dance across the faces of people who once believed places like this weren't meant for them. She didn't feel powerful. She felt responsible. And in that responsibility, she found peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from becoming. And in that quiet, grounded moment the story, her story, no longer belonged to her alone. It belonged to everyone who had been invisible, everyone who had been doubted, everyone who had waited for someone to open the door and say, "Come in. You were always meant to be here."